Why Serbia is not the southern part of Central Europe, and why, after communism, Serbia could not have become a country similar to Czechia. Svetislav Basara is among those who are under the illusion that Serbia could have followed the Czech path after communism. Of course, he is also mistaken when he claims that Serbia is the southern part of Central Europe. In Serbia, this can be true in a historical sense only for Vojvodina. This is also the main impetus for occasional certain separatist tendencies in Vojvodina, namely the awareness of belonging to a different cultural circle and the awareness of a different historical experience from Serbia south of the Sava and the Danube. Danica Popović, an economist, says that since the geography and culture of their peoples have not changed, the reason for the difference in economic standards between Serbia and the countries of the Visegrad group must be institutions. By the way, culture has changed to some extent due to the passage of time and the cultural influences of the West, for example. She makes the incredible claim that Czechia, Poland, Hungary, and Serbia during the 1990s had almost the same GDP per capita of, I quote, around $1,000. That is completely false. According to the data of the World Bank, in 1995, Czechia had a GDP per capita of $5,800, Hungary of $4,500, and Serbia of $2,200. You can find this data on the data.worldbank.org. She, like many others, still considers the development during the decades after the fall of communism in Central and Eastern Europe as a period in which the Visegrad countries overtook Serbia, in the economic sense, overlooking that the economic standard of Serbia within the socialist Yugoslavia was not based on its economy. The economic standard of the socialist Yugoslavia was made possible mainly by financing from the West. Hence, the money for the simultaneous construction of subsidized apartments, factories, educational institutions, hospitals for, quote, free education and healthcare, etc. As early as the 1960s, the sending of workers, approximately 1 million during the 1960s and 70s combined, to Western Europe began, organized at the state level, because the economy of Yugoslavia could not achieve full employment even though its area is among the least populated in Europe. When external funding stopped during the 1980s, the disintegration of the federal state soon began. If it weren't for the Cold War and so much foreign funding, the socialist Yugoslavia would probably have disintegrated already in the 1960s, due to the great differences in economic development, culture, and social and political history between its republics and peoples. Regarding the illusions about the economy of the socialist Yugoslavia, Zoran Đinđić said in an interview from 2002 the following, I quote, People lived as a citizen class without an underlying economy. We have built a middle class without a private economy. There is no middle class in any country without a private economy. We have built a citizen society on the state economy. That was a beautiful illusion. End quote. Claiming that Serbia and the aforementioned countries of the Visegrad Group differ in the time period from the end of communism until today only in terms of institutional development, Danica Popović fails to consider the significance of the existing differences between the nations of these countries, such as cultural and social ones. She therefore overlooks that, for example, there are significant cultural differences between Serbs and Czechs. She also ignores the economic history and, for example, the fact that Czechia was economically more developed than Austria until the period of imposed communism, while Serbia in the past century and a half was never even close to the Austrian economic standard. The claim that simply better institutions are the answer to the question about the reason for the higher economic level of the Visegrad Group countries in relation to Serbia is a gross and unsustainable simplification. As if any station can establish and maintain functional institutions of any kind, of just any kind. As if that which institutions can function in a nation has nothing to do with its culture and its social history. In my opinion, Serbia is organized to and regulated and orderly to the extent that corresponds to the average need for order and understanding of order among its inhabitants. Serbia has the kind of government that is in line with the average understanding of its inhabitants about what their government should be like. Serbia has an economic standard that corresponds to the average effort, work ethic, and willingness to work, way of working, and education and intelligence of its inhabitants. I also remind the reader of Đinđić's remarks about the importance of cultural elements for the organization of the state and for the functioning of the modern market economy. Quote, "Not only is sensitive and complex legal political protection necessary for the functioning of the market, but even that external sanctioning, no matter how impartial it may be, does not lead to the desired result if it is not the last means of intervention in front of which a network of general mandatory cultural norms spreads. The natural laws of the market that Marx talked about have behind them several centuries of development of, quote, citizen society as a normative community, and are as little natural as, quote, the needs on which the market principle of demand is based. The introduction of a, quote, free economic market in a country where there is no, quote, citizen society would not summarily create Holland, but Honduras." This quote is from the book Squaring the Yugoslav Circle. That is from the text Squaring the Yugoslav Circle in the book Yugoslavia as an Unfinished State. In that text, Đinđić also spoke about the, quote, unsuitability of the categories of classical liberalism to the social and political experience of our country, end quote. The liberal constructivism that Đinđić criticizes in that text is also the position of Danica Popović. Quote, "And as long as liberal constructivism being in parentheses which I added, observes the social political reality of Yugoslavia, I add, that is Serbia, in the light of its, quote, deviation from the liberal concept, the angle of open options will not go beyond constructivism," wrote Đinđić. Why Serbia could not follow the Czech path after communism? Czechia is sometimes taken as a model that Serbia should have followed when it comes to ending the communist order, implementing the transition, and organizing the country. This is due to the similar size of the two countries, the fact that Slavic languages are spoken in both countries, and the fact that from the end of 1918 until the fall of communism, both countries were the leading countries of the multinational Union states, Yugoslavia and Czechoslovakia. Then, however, the great differences between the two countries, their cultures and the historical experience of their peoples are being neglected. Serbs and Czechs, a brief historical, sociological, and cultural comparison. Historical experience from the New Age of circa 1500 to 1878 in case of Serbs, and 1918 in case of Czechs. Within the Austrian, since 1867, Austro-Hungarian Empire, which was a European regulated state, an ordered state governed by the rule of law, which participated in European development in terms of state administration, science, technology, infrastructure, education, and art. Serbs, mostly within the Ottoman Empire, which was a non-European state which did not participate in European development in terms of state administration, science, technology, infrastructure, education, and art. Although it should be said that at the end of this period, certain elements of modern European civilization were incorporated in the Principality of Serbia, such as, for example, certain aspects of state administration, the telegraph, and the theater. Nevertheless, in the first decades of the 20th century, Serbia was among the European countries with the lowest percentage of industrial workers, and in terms of the structure of society, predominantly a country of villages and extended families. Even before the Second World War, Czechia was, on the other hand, predominantly a country of cities and the petite bourgeoisie. The presence of a large petty bourgeois class, in German Kleinbürger, is necessary for the good organization of a state. At the beginning of the 20th century, Czechia was by far the most industrially developed area in the whole of Austro-Hungary. Approximately 60 to 70% of the total industry of the monarchy, of the double monarchy, was in the territory of today's Czechia. Czechia participated to a large extent in modernity even before the First World War. That was the so-called First Modernity. Czechia, like Austria and Germany, I mean here the Jugendbewegung and Wandervogelbewegung movement, movements had a critique of cities and the industrial society even before the First World War, expressed in youth movements oriented towards engaging in activities in nature. Among other things, this is why the gap between the rural and the urban in Czechia is significantly smaller than in Serbia, in my opinion. Dozens of historical cities in Czechia during communism reminded its inhabitants daily of the mature civil society that once existed in that country, together with the market economy, and were an image of an alternative to the communist order that could be re-established one day. The rate of urbanization in Czechia was 75% in 1980, while in Serbia it was only 46%. This was again data from the World Bank. In line with this is the fact that in Serbian cities, especially those south of the Sava and the Danube, the urban area is significantly smaller than in Czech cities with a similar population. Literacy rate at the beginning of the 20th century. Czechia approximately 97%, Serbia approximately 15 to 20%. Several times in Serbia I had the occasion to hear complaints about petty bourgeois considerations and, quote, petty bourgeois morals. However, the petty bourgeoisie is a minority in Serbian society. One of the reasons why Serbia is not a well-organized country is that there are not enough small townspeople in the society. I mean, here this class called petty bourgeoisie or Kleinbürgertum in German. This is also one of the main reasons why people from more organized and richer countries and more orderly countries visit Serbia, to have a break from the petty bourgeois mentality which dominates their societies and some of the rules that such a social order implies. And not only implies, but imposes. Petty bourgeoisie is a socio-economic class. Petit bourgeois is an adjective that denotes some of the essential traits that usually characterize people from that class. Narrow interests, mostly determined by their profession, focus on the realization of personal, modest desires and modest ambitions. So far, I have not come across any Czech who thinks that he could be a good prime minister or coach of the national football team if only he were given the opportunity, which cannot be said of Serbs. A large petty bourgeois class is necessary for a functional administrative class or administrators, clerks, as well as for the good performance of various service jobs. If you want politeness and a certain competence in the service sector and in contact with city and state institutions, among others, you want the other side to be a petty bourgeois person. In order for Serbia to become more orderly, it will have to become a petty bourgeois country to a greater extent, more of a petty bourgeois country than it is currently. The historical misunderstanding, primarily during the time of the Principality and Kingdom between the Serbs from Austria, or Austro-Hungary, and those from Serbia, is to a significant extent, but not exclusively, a misunderstanding has been a misunderstanding between the Central European petty bourgeois class, petty bourgeois people from a distinctly class society, and the rural population from a classless society. In addition, the negative attitude towards the petty bourgeoisie in Serbia was also inherited from communism. Even in the 19th century, communists strongly attacked that class because, as an important pillar of any existing government and social order, it represented a big problem for them. It was not difficult to explain to the working class why the large bourgeoisie, industrialists, big landowners, and hereditary nobility are a problem, but it was to explain why the modest, moderate, reasonable, not much richer than them, petty bourgeois are a problem. That is why the communists condemned the petty bourgeois focus on modest personal desires and their lack of interest in political struggle, and often in politics in general. As Max Stirner said, I quote, "The bourgeois class is the nobility of achievement." This is from his main work, Der Einzige und sein Eigentum, or The Unique One and His Property. Because Serbia is not, nor has it ever been, a dominantly citizen society, in it personal achievement is not a significant social value. That circumstance is one of the basic elements for the, to a significant extent, considerable extent, anti-meritocratic character of Serbian society, for self-evident nepotism and wide-ranging corruption. Those who say that they are for a, quote, normal and decent Serbia, or that they are for a, quote, normal and decent people to be in power in Serbia, actually want to say that they are for a citizen Serbia. But Serbia, due to historical experience, character of its culture, economic history, economic standard, and social development, will not be a dominantly citizen society even in 30 years, in my opinion. For those for whom a citizen society is very important, it is better therefore to emigrate and save themselves from frustration. Serbian discord is proverbial. It is partly a consequence of collective narcissism, because it arises from the circumstance that everyone wants to have it their way, and that is precisely an expression of narcissism. This discord could partially be a consequence of the anthropological and geographical, cultural, historical diversity of the Serbs. I distinguish three basic areas: Dinaric mountainous tribal area, flatland Central European ex-Austro-Hungarian small town area, ex-Ottoman, ex-Byzantine cooperative area. Locus of the Golden Age, so-called Golden Age. Locating the Golden Age for Serbs in the Middle Ages, the Nemanjić dynasty of the 13th and 14th centuries, in itself implies a strong departure and distancing from modernity. Only with ignorance of the conditions of life in the Middle Ages, its social, political, feudalism, and cultural reality and level of civilization in the 14th century, a plague was raging in Serbia after all, can it be seen as a, quote, golden age. In Czech historical consciousness, on the other hand, the time of the First Republic, from 1918 to 1938, figures as a golden age. End of the 1918, so end of the First World War to 1938, figures as a golden age. This is an era less than a century away from the present, an era in which there was a mature civil society and a developed industry in Czechia. Attitude towards Germany. Central Europe is predominantly German economic area. German cultural influence is also strong in it. The German language was the language of higher education and historically the lingua franca of Central Europe. At one point, Marx noted how ironic the circumstance was that at the Slavist Congress in Prague in 1848, the official language of communication was German, because it was the only language that all delegates understood. This is from the text De Panslavismus, der Krieg in Schleswig-Holstein, from 1852. For 300 years, Czechia was part of an empire dominated by Germans, or Deutsche Österreicher, as they were then called. Before World War II, Germans were the largest minority in Czechia. In Bohemia, they made up a third of the population, in Morava a fifth, or Moravia, and in Silesia as much as 2/5. Germans were either the most numerous minority or constituted the majority in numerous Czech cities, such as Brno, Znojmo, Jihlava, Karlovy Vary, Liberec, Ústí nad Labem, Děčín, Teplice, Heb, České Budějovice, and a few others. In all these and other Czech cities, there are historically German settlements, which is noticeable also in their architecture. Due to a much less traumatic historical experience with them, the Czechs don't have nearly as much reason for animosity towards the Germans and Austrians as do the Serbs. Entertainment concept and mentality. Czechs, quiet hedonism in cafes and wine bars. Drunkenness does not encourage them to fight. Serbs, oriental melodies, dancing on tables, trumpeters, breaking of dishes, conflicts over face and honor. Typical motifs of Serbian popular songs: emotional pain, despair, sadness, self-harm, self-humiliation, emotional blackmail, drama, addiction to alcohol and analgesics or analgetics. Folk music is very different, temperament too. The Czechs are an intemperate nation of rule followers, mild-mannered and conciliatory. Among Czechs during 9.5 years, I never came across a man whom I could say was what in Serbian is called prek, something like irascible and short-tempered at the same time. I cannot remember that I ever met such a person. Among the Serbs, the choleric part of the temperament is much more present. There is less tolerance for frustration. There is a greater tendency towards aggression and brazen behavior, and also solving conflicts by means of violence. Serbian culture is generally not a rule-following culture. Serbian culture is generally not a culture of dialogue and tolerance for different opinions, in my opinion. And in it, the dissenter is often considered an enemy. Also, aggressive anti-intellectualism is present to a significant extent in it, formulated in the frequently used imperative, "don't philosophize," which, by the way, I have not come across in other languages so far. In Belgrade, I saw a number of times how a man who has just missed the departure of a public transport vehicle gets angry, shouts, swears at the driver, sometimes even hits the vehicle with his hand. I never came across such a scene in Czechia. If a person finds himself or herself in a situation where the vehicle has left before he had the time to get into it, to come on board, he shrugs his shoulders, takes a few steps back, and accepts that he will have to wait for the next departure. This example is significant because it illustrates the difference in frustration tolerance. Frustration tolerance is one of the so-called secondary virtues, which are a very significant factor when it comes to the character of the social order and the capacity of a society also for economic achievements. These virtues include also punctuality, reliability, orderliness, and dedication to work. About cocking. Cocking is how I translated the Serbian expression and word kurčenje. I will try to explain it now, what I mean by this. Czechs do not do that, namely. This is one of the reasons why physical conflicts between men are rare in Czechia, in my experience. In Serbia, on the other hand, cocking or kurčenje is a common phenomenon. Many men there find themselves forced to do that, if for no other reason, due to others doing it. Some do it because it's the only thing they know how to do and to try to deceive the environment about their status. Cocking communicates ambitions, ideas about one's own importance, physical strength, and social position. It is important to determine whether the person who is cocking has a foundation for and a basis, that is, a basis for such behavior. If it is suspected that there is no foundation for it, sooner or later someone will ask him the question, "Why are you cocking?" Which is usually a prelude to a conflict aimed at establishing the right to do that. If the cocky one loses, he is expected to stop cocking immediately so as not to suffer additional consequences. If he wins, he is justified in continuing to do that, at least until the next conflict and its resolution. All this cocology is unknown to the Czechs, on the other hand, fortunately. Happy are the societies in which cocking is a rare phenomenon. However, where did cocking as a form of behavior and cockiness as a trait come from? Among other things, out of the disorganization of the state and society, in my opinion. This disorder, this lack of order, often makes it impossible to determine the legitimacy of claims to a certain social position. In those circumstances, cocking appears as an attempt to informally establish those pretensions. In orderly societies, on the other hand, cocking soon leads to social ostracism and then, also if deserved, to legal penalties.